Welcome to one of the most important systems in human body, that is the respiratory system. I mentioned like that because these days, because of this disease condition COVID-19, the respiratory system is in discussion a lot. So we are going to learn about the process of respiration. So once we say respiration, the inhalation and exhalation, or breathe in and breathe out, come into your mind. But remember, it is only a part of this respiratory process. Different animals show different types of respiratory movements. So you know that respiration is the process by which energy is released due to the digestive end products which are absorbed into our body. So you learned that during nutrition, organisms obtained materials. Organisms obtain materials for the maintenance of life during nutrition. And those materials undergo digestion, and digestive end products are absorbed into bloodstream ultimately. Then during respiration, these end products are undergoing cellular respiration and release energy. You know this cellular respiration takes place inside the mitochondrion, and there the energy is stored in the form of ATP, which is an organic compound. So we are going to learn about this process of respiration. So in human, respiration is a complex process, and we can divide it into three main stages. They are gas exchange between external environment and lungs. That is the external gaseous exchange. Then second stage is gas exchange in alveoli. That happens inside the air sacs, which consist of alveoli. We'll learn about these. The third stage is cellular respiration, which I mentioned earlier. So, ventilation is the intake of oxygen into lungs and removal of gaseous waste in cells. So, once we say gaseous waste, it includes carbon dioxide gas and water vapor. So, ventilation is the process in which oxygen is taken into lungs and gaseous waste in cells are removed. In order to demonstrate this external gaseous exchange, we can use a model or a setup like this. So, I have given diagrams of the setup that can be used, as well as the structure of the respiratory system. So we can compare these two. In our body there is a muscular structure which is known as the diaphragm. Above the diaphragm there is the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity consists of organs like lungs and heart. And below the diaphragm there is the abdominal cavity, which contains organs like stomach and intestine and all. So these lungs are located inside the thoracic cavity. In our model, we have used a bell jar, a glass bell jar, and this bell jar represents the thoracic cavity. And the diaphragm is represented by a rubber membrane or a polythene sheath, which is attached to the bottom of the gas jar. Then You can see here there is a Y-shaped tube. This tube indicates the trachea and the bronchi, two bronchi, left bronchus and the right bronchus. Then the two balloons attached to this Y-shaped tube are the lungs. So external gaseous exchange can be explained by using this setup. Once we breathe in, volume of the thoracic cavity should be increased. For that, we can pull the rubber membrane or polythene sheet downwards. We can pull the rubber membrane or the polythene sheet. As a result, the volume of this thoracic cavity or the volume inside the bell jar is increased. Therefore, air comes in through this Y-shaped tube. In a real scenario, it is the trachea. So air comes in and the two balloons which represent the two lungs get inflated. The lungs are filled with air. Once we breathe out or during exhalation, the volume of the thoracic cavity should be decreased. Therefore, we can push up this rubber membrane or the polythene sheet. As a result, air goes out through this Y-shaped tube and the balloons also remove air. The balloons are constricted here. So by using this setup, we can easily understand the functioning of our respiratory system, the external gaseous exchange which takes place. So these are the parts of the respiratory tract. It starts with the nasal cavity and the buccal cavity is also open to it through this common chamber pharynx. Just below the pharynx there is the larynx which we call as the sound box, and this is the trachea. Trachea is made out of C-shaped incomplete cartilaginous rings. There are about 16 to 20 such cartilage rings here, and it is divided into two branches which we call as bronchi. Singular is bronchus. These bronchi are further divided into bronchioles, and these bronchioles are inside the lungs, and these bronchioles end up with air sacs which contain alveoli. The diaphragm is also shown here. So you are asked to label the parts of the given diagram of the respiratory tract, and it is said that the system involved in entering oxygen into lungs and release of gaseous waste products produced during biological processes is the respiratory system. So here you can see, I will label the parts. So here this is the nasal cavity and the buccal cavity here, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and it is divided into left and right bronchus, bronchi, left and right bronchi. Bronchi are further divided into bronchioles, and here the diaphragm is shown. In addition to that, I told you these lungs are inside the thoracic cavity, so these lungs get protected from external pressure and all by these ribs. There is the rib cage, and these ribs are connected to the sternum. This bony structure is known as the sternum in Sinhala Urathalaya. Ribs are connected to the sternum by cartilages. These are cartilages. In between the ribs there are muscles. These dark brown color ones with strips are known as intercostal muscles. So here there is a bony structure which is known as the sternum, and these are the ribs, and ribs are attached to the sternum by cartilage, and in between the ribs there are muscles known as intercostal muscles. So on this side they have given a longitudinal section of the thoracic cavity, and here the lungs are inside. A section is not taken on this side, so you can easily compare. So first we'll consider the nasal cavity. So the internal surface of nasal cavity is covered with mucus. Mucus is secreted, and therefore the lining of the nasal cavity is moist or wet, and there are hair on the lining of the nasal cavity that is important to trap the dust particles and other strange particles which enter the nasal cavity. Then there are numerous cilia present on the lining of the nasal cavity. Cilia are hair-like projections, and these cilia show rhythmic movements. Actually, these cilia are the lining of the epithelium. The epithelial cells contain a ciliary lining. So, because of the rhythmic movement of cilia, the bacteria, dust particles, and other waste found in inhaled air which are stick onto mucus are sent out of the respiratory tract. The cilia are rhythmically moving like the paddy moving to one direction when the wind is blowing. As a result of this process, the strange particles are pushed away from the respiratory tract. So this prevents the entry of these strange particles, disease causing agents, into the respiratory tract or the lungs. Then here it is said, by rhythmic movements of cilia the waste materials are sent out. The materials that are collected at pharynx are removed out with saliva when we are sneezing or coughing. These strange particles along with phlegm are removed or released from the respiratory tract. So there are certain changes that take place when air is inhaled through the nasal cavity. One thing is, due to the presence of mucus, the air gets moisturized or humidified. First one, moisturizing or humidifying inhaled air. Next, because of the body temperature, the inhaled air is warmed up. Warming up of inhaled air. Then as the third change, we can say the waste materials are removed from inhaled air. Removal of waste from inhaled air. Those are three changes that happen when we inhale air through the nasal cavity. So far we have discussed about the external gaseous exchange or the exchange of gases between external environment and lungs. So this consists of two stages, what we call as inspiration and expiration, or the inhalation process and the exhalation process. So during inspiration, what happens is, that air enters into the lungs. For air to enter into the lungs, the volume of the thoracic cavity should be increased. as we have learnt earlier from the model that we had prepared. So, in order to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, certain changes take place. One is the intercostal muscles, which are in between the ribs, contract. As a result, the ribs move up as well as the sternum moves forward. I will repeat. The intercostal muscles contract, and as a result, ribs move upwards and the sternum will move forward. Another change occurs in order to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, that is the contraction of the muscles of diaphragm. The normal structure of the diaphragm is, it is much more curved. Here it is shown. So in order to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, the diaphragm contracts and it reduces its curvature. That means it moves down in order to reduce the curvature. So due to the contraction of intercostal muscles, ribs move upwards and forward. Due to the contraction of the diaphragm, it reduces its curvature. Because of all of these, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, and once the volume is less, the pressure is high, and once the volume is increased here, the pressure becomes less. The internal pressure is less, therefore air enters through the nasal cavity towards the lungs. Volume increases and air enters. That is the inspiration or inhalation process. Then we'll move on to expiration. During expiration, the air inside the lungs should be removed. For air to be removed, the volume of the thoracic cavity should be decreased or reduced. For that, the intercostal muscles relax, and as a result, the ribs and the sternum come to their original position. And the diaphragm also relaxes and it becomes more curved as it was in the normal position. The diaphragm relaxes and it is curved. Because of this, the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. That means there is high pressure inside than the external atmospheric pressure. Therefore, air is pushed outwards through the nasal cavity. Volume of the thoracic cavity decreases and air is pushed outwards through the nasal cavity. That is the expiration or the exhalation. If I repeat, intercostal muscles relax, taking the ribs and the sternum to their original position. Diaphragm relaxes and it becomes more curved. As a result, volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. Therefore, air is pushed outwards through the nasal cavity. So this is the external gaseous exchange. Then we'll move on to the gas exchange that takes place in alveoli. That is the second stage. So here you are shown the bronchiole. The bronchioles are further divided and they end up with these air sacs which contain alveoli. Singular is alveolus. Actually, this is like a bunch of grapes, and these structures are there to increase the area, increase the surface area to make the gaseous exchange more effective. You can see all these alveoli are covered with blood capillaries. So these alveolar walls become the respiratory surfaces of man. The inhaled air finally reached the alveoli through the nasal cavity. This is the pathway: nasal cavity, pharynx, trachea, bronchi, and the bronchioles, and finally they come into alveoli. So you are asked to describe the exchange of substances in alveoli. We move on to this diagram. It shows how the exchange of gases take place in an alveolus. The respiratory surface of the human is the alveolar wall. So here you are shown the alveolar wall, and you can see it is a single layer of cells and it is a thin membrane. So it is the respiratory surface of man, alveolar wall. And here you are shown the wall of the blood capillary. Once we have inhaled, the concentration of oxygen in the inhaled air, or the concentration of oxygen in the alveolus, is greater than the concentration of oxygen in the blood capillary. So here you are shown in blue color the deoxygenated blood. That means that blood contains less amount of oxygen. So because of the high oxygen concentration in alveoli, oxygen gets diffused into blood capillaries, and carbon dioxide concentration in blood capillaries is high than the inhaled air or the air inside the alveolus. Therefore, carbon dioxide and water vapor gets diffused from the blood capillary to the alveolus. So, gaseous exchange takes place through the alveolus by means of diffusion. As the oxygen concentration is high, oxygen enters the blood capillaries from the alveolus by means of diffusion, and from the blood capillary, carbon dioxide and water vapor are diffused into the alveolus. So, the exchange of gases takes place by means of diffusion. The thin membrane of both the blood capillary and the alveolar wall facilitate this diffusion. So that is the second stage of respiration, that is gas exchange in alveoli. So there are certain adaptations of the respiratory surface for efficient gas exchange. They are: the surface should be moistened and permeable for gas exchange. This permeability is obtained because of this single cell layer. Then the surface should be thin for diffusion of gases, and a large surface area should be there to exchange large volume of gas according to the need of animals. More active animals need more oxygen to generate more energy. Then surface should be highly vascularized, so there are so many blood capillaries. In many animals, body cover acts as the respiratory surface and gases exchange through the body cover. So, if we consider the adaptations of alveoli for efficient gas exchange, presence of blood capillary network around alveoli, then presence of a thin alveolar wall, moist alveolar surface because of the presence of mucus, presence of large number of alveolar sacs to increase the surface area for the exchange of gases. So far we have discussed about the external gaseous exchange and the gas exchange which occurs in alveoli. So I need to mention something else. Here you can, I told you this is the trachea, and this pink color structure, it shows the esophagus. So you can see that esophagus is behind the trachea, and I told you this trachea consists of incomplete C-shaped cartilage rings. That is because when we are swallowing something, as these two are in contact with each other, when we are swallowing something, the respiratory tract can be blocked if the trachea consisted of complete rings. As they are incomplete, once we are swallowing something, it does not affect the exchange of gases or the passage of gases through the trachea. Then we will discuss about the cellular respiration.